Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Sunday, August 7th, 2022, and today we are going to be talking about the United States Senate elections. Now, this morning I made a video talking about the FiveThirtyEight forecast and how the Democratic Party has about a 60% chance at retaining control of the U.S. Senate. Now, our Senate forecast that we've been looking at for literally a year and a half, practically more than that actually, my first 2022 forecast was released in December of 2020, has been ever-changing and really has moved around quite a bit. The FiveThirtyEight forecast has only been out for about 2 months now, and looking at the forecast that I have had for quite some time, it definitely has been in different positions. At different points in time, I expected states such as Wisconsin or Iowa or North Carolina or even some cases, Pennsylvania, Arizona, and Nevada to go in different directions. And we can find that in my most recent projection, it seems to be much more up to date to what is happening in terms of candidate quality, in terms of people who are running and who is not. For example, Chuck Grassley in Iowa definitely made that race less competitive than it would have been had it been an open race. Ohio is becoming a little bit interesting, and we just got some new primary results out of some of these states that are definitely going to update the way we look at them, but maybe not necessarily the forecast. So let's go ahead and take a look and take a start, because much of this that we can see is already characterized from the very beginning that the Senate elections were even set to occur. These states are what we call safe states, that we know they're going to go in certain directions regardless of whichever candidates are put up within their respective nominee list. So let's go ahead and get started in characterizing them. These are the safest states that we can characterize thus far. The reason why we characterize them as safe is because they are so extremely partisan. You've heard about the, stereotypes about right-wingers, left-wingers coming from specific states, and a lot of that is true based off of just simply how some of these states votes. For instance, you take a look at New York or California. These are the states that are typically used to characterize Democrats. That's because these are overwhelming Democratic states. Of course, they're holding Senate elections this election cycle. They practically have to nearly every single cycle, with the exception of one. That's how it is. But looking at our map here, we have a bunch of states that are both safe Republican and safe Democratic. So that means no matter who you put up, and I mean that quite literally speaking, no matter who you put up in many of these races, they simply will not be competitive. But in some of them, they are a little bit more potentially competitive than others, and we can talk about it very briefly. So the two states that really pique my interest here are the states of Missouri and Utah. These are two states in which we were expecting potentially, and I say this potentially because never once did my characterization change within the states, but we expected them potentially to become more competitive. And the reason why we thought that was because there were two things going on. There is still one going on in Utah, which we have yet to see if this will actually pan out to being a somewhat competitive race. But we'll start in the state of Missouri, where the primary just occurred last Tuesday, and they chose a candidate named Eric Schmidt. Now, believe it or not, there were multiple Erics running within this Missouri primary, and Donald Trump's endorsement, he endorsed actually the name Eric. So it could have been any of the three Erics within the race, but the one Eric it seemed like he was trying to avoid, or at least Republicans desperately did not want him to endorse, was the former governor of the state, Eric Greitens. Now, he was a governor for a very brief period of time, and I say it was very brief because it was about 2 years. He had to resign due to allegations of misconduct and abuse, and quite frankly, things that simply don't need to be discussed too heavily. You can read up on that yourself. It got so bad that his ex-wife came out on television in the state of Missouri and begged, and I mean begged voters not to vote for him because she says that he abused him, he abused her and his child, and that was something that really struck a chord with Republican primary voters, and thus they chose not to elect him. But if he was the primary leader, in fact, he was the front runner for many months, if he did win that nomination, there was a good chance that the November election might become competitive, because who wants to put someone like that in the U.S. Senate? Take a look at Alabama in 2017. But luckily for Republicans, that simply didn't happen, so now the race is safe. The state of Utah, on the other hand, has an independent running. His name is Evan McMullin. He was the independent candidate from 2016, if you remember that election. Obviously you do, but I mean more specifically his candidacy. He got about 21% of the vote in Utah in 2016 to Hillary Clinton's 27%. Donald Trump actually got less than 50%. For context, in 2012, Mitt Romney won over 70% of the vote in the state of Utah, so he definitely narrowed it down by siphoning votes away from President Trump. The Democrats chose not to nominate anyone in their Senate election, and thus propping up Evan McMullin, this independent who is now seemingly polling within single digits of the Republican here, Mike Lee. But realistically, it's a red state. he's largely viewed as someone who is estranged from the Republican Party, so it doesn't seem too likely that Evan McMullin will end up being close at all. So for right now, we're characterizing it as safe, but I would definitely keep an eye out. But for the state of Missouri, definitely considered safe now. The states of Iowa and Alaska are states that you might not typically see characterized as safe, even on the presidential level. But the reason why they're safe is because, number one, in Iowa, Chuck Grassley, the Republican incumbent there, is running for re-election. He has never won an election by less than double digits, and it looks like he's on track to do so again. There is a very real possibility, though, and I say this because I want it to be backed up and confirmed by more data from the state, that it does narrow up. I think as we get closer to November, with my expectations potentially that it does move back up to safe. Right now, Iowa could narrow down to likely. I'm going to wait for a little bit more data, or just honestly doing a little bit more personal research into the state. But for right now, I'm confident in my characterization, but it definitely can change. And I say that it will change, but no further than likely Republican, because Republicans simply are just going to win this Trump plus 8 state in a year that is expected to be much better for them than the 2020 year. Looking at the state of Alaska, though, 2 Republicans are actually in the top 2. Kelly Tshibaka, who has received the endorsement from President Trump, and Lisa Murkowski, the Republican incumbent. Murkowski has been through a lot. She won her first election, then was able to, move on to another election, lost the primary to another Republican, ran a write-in campaign for the November election, won that write-in campaign, won in 2016 with just about 40% of the vote. I mean, what you saw was that she went through so many close and competitive elections. She has never won with a majority, but now she will be forced to, because there is ranked choice voting. But the catch is there's another Republican who are in the top 2. So realistically, she's not losing to a Democrat. She might lose to another Republican, and that's when it gets a little bit more difficult. But realistically speaking, I expect Lisa Murkowski to be in the Senate in a year from now. So that brings us to 45-45. Democrats and Republicans are about even, as they are already in our 50-50 Senate map. But we have these next states that we call likely states, where we generally know how they're going to go. The margin of victory isn't exactly that impressive enough to say that these are considered safe states. In different types of circumstances or national environments, it could go in another direction. The first state I'm going to characterize as likely blue is the state of Colorado. This is a state where Michael Bennet, a candidate for president in 2020, incumbent senator who has served in Colorado for over a decade, he is now running for re-election and is on track to win. The interesting thing that Republicans think might actually make this race competitive is that the opponent there, Joe O'Dea, is a more moderate Republican who defeated a very, very big pro-Trump, pro-Make America Great Again, et cetera, Republican. Enough so that this Republican is so moderate that he's pro-choice. But we don't know if that's actually going to really make that much of an impact. We get it. We have been talking about the issue of abortion and its impact on the midterms. But I can't imagine that a state such as Colorado, that Biden won by 14, is going to swing enough to vote against an incumbent. It was already a stretch in an open seat for Virginia, a Biden plus 10 state, to go to the GOP. And even if Colorado was to swing in the way that Virginia did, Colorado would still vote blue. Just something to think about. So Colorado for right now, we're keeping as likely blue. I think Michael Bennet as the incumbent is going to win re-election, and I think that's been pretty well established for the past couple of months. Moving over to the next state we're going to characterize as likely, we have the state of Florida. Now, the state of Florida has Marco Rubio, and Marco Rubio individually is a very strong candidate. Now, he didn't make it through the presidential nomination. He didn't even win the presidential nomination or delegates in the state of Florida in 2016, but he went on to the general election and outperformed President Trump by a very significant amount. When you take a look at the results in Florida, you find that in 2016, Donald Trump won by 1, Marco Rubio won by 8. There was a significant portion of voters in Miami-Dade, in Broward, Hispanic voters in specific, that loved Marco Rubio, and I think that Marco Rubio has definitely made this individual appeal to Hispanic voters, minority voters in general. That has been enough to add on to the already base support that Republicans get, and I think that we can definitely expect him to defeat Val Demings in the November election. I think she is a strong candidate, but this simply is not her year, and Florida, quite frankly, just might not be her state. Moving over to the next state, we're going to characterize as a likely red state. We're done with the likely blue states. We're moving on to likely red. We already characterized Florida. The next one is in a very similar region, the state of North Carolina. Now, Congressman Ted Budd is currently running for the Senate seat here. He was endorsed by President Trump very, very early on. You're talking 2021, when the primary was, of course, in 2022. Now, the one thing that could have made North Carolina more competitive was the potential nomination, very similar to Missouri, of the former governor, Pat McCrory. And McCrory, like Greitens in Missouri, was the frontrunner for many months. Donald Trump's endorsement really didn't sway voters too tremendously until the very end. And that nomination for Pat McCrory became more likely as the months went on, and people were very, very worried. There was this expectation, especially knowing that Pat McCrory lost in the 2016 election. If you didn't know that about him, he lost the 2016 governor election, then lost, the Democrat there won again in 2020, despite Donald Trump winning the state again in 2020. I mean, what you were talking about there was that a severe Republican underperformance in both of the elections. And North Carolina, went to the GOP in many other elections in between, and in many House elections, many House votes, presidential elections, whatever it might be. Pat McCrory was the loser in that election in 2016. So when he came back in 2022, the GOP knew that his unpopularity was going to, precede his reputation. It was going to really diminish the chances the GOP had in an already competitive state. So they nominated Congressman Ted Budd, and that was honestly one of the best decisions they have made thus far. Because right now the expectations here are high for the GOP, whereas they otherwise might have been a lot lower, especially knowing the Democrats nominated Sherry Beasley, who served as the Chief Justice on the North Carolina Supreme Court and almost won her election in 2020, only lost by a fraction of a percentage point, outperformed President Biden. So if she was running against a governor who severely underperformed President Trump, well, you could have seen how that would have played out. But obviously, that didn't happen for the GOP. And looking at the next state we are going to characterize as likely a Republican, we have the state of Ohio. Now, Ohio, I'm actually having a little bit more of an internal qualm about moving it down to lean Republican. I haven't had it outside of the likely Republican column, I think, throughout the entirety of my predictions. The point is that Donald Trump won this state by about 8 points in 2016 and 2020, very similar to the state of Iowa. Rob Portman, as the Republican incumbent, won the last election by 20 points, is not running for re-election. But Republicans made the right choice to J.D. Vance over Josh Mandel, but J.D. Vance is not running a good campaign. I mean, there is a reason why the polling data across the state has the Democrats ahead. I think this is a severely underpolled and also overestimated Democratic polled state. I think, looking at these numbers, there is no way in heck that, Tim Ryan is ahead by 4 points statewide, and I think that's a very fair assessment. Looking at the forecast, we still expect the Republicans to win the state of Ohio. J.D. Vance has a 76% chance of victory. But if this narrows up from 2020, it tells us that J.D. Vance simply couldn't capitalize on what Donald Trump was able to do so well. Right now, I expect it to be likely, but I could be persuaded over the next couple of months with more data coming out of the state that it could come down to lean. I think Republicans still win it at the end of the day. It would take a lot of mountain moving in order for Ohio to go blue. But I will say that right now I'm not exactly impressed by the campaign that J.D. Vance is running. So that removes all of our likely states. We are now at a 48 advantage for the GOP to 46 for the Democratic Party. 6 toss-up races: Nevada, Arizona, Georgia, New Hampshire, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. The good news for the GOP is that 4 out of those 6 races have Democratic incumbents. Only 2, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, have Republican incumbents. But there lies a problem in many of the candidates in practically all of these races. We'll start off with characterizing the lean Republican state out of the state of Wisconsin. I think this is the one that I want to talk about the least because Ron Johnson and Mandela Barnes haven't exactly provided too much of interesting content to actually look at within the state. It's been very stagnant. The chances of victory there have remained the same, and the polling numbers haven't really been updated. It's also a severely underpolled state. But we will wait and see for more data, for more information to come out of the state. But for right now, Ron Johnson starts out with an advantage as he did won in 2010 and 2016. I think it maintains a victory in 2022, at least as it stands right now, especially considering the environment that we are in. That remains with 5 states that we can take a look at. Again, Nevada, Arizona, Georgia, Pennsylvania, and New Hampshire. Let's characterize the state of New Hampshire, in which the Republican Party simply dropped the ball. They could have had Governor Chris Sununu, one of the most popular governors in the entire country, run for the Senate seat. And he declined. He declined 7 days after Glenn Youngkin won the governorship in the state of Virginia. Now, declining this race was just a start of a snowball effect. And I don't say that because it's cold there. I say it because it's true. A snowball effect that has now launched the Democratic Party's catapult into victory. I mean, looking at the expectations for the GOP months ago, New Hampshire was a state that honestly could have been very easily locked down. You take a look at my projection following Glenn Youngkin's victory, New Hampshire was likely red. Why might that be? Because all the signs indicated that Chris Sununu was going to take this advantage, defeat Maggie Hassan handedly, and hand the Republican Party a very large majority in the U.S. Senate. But he declined. And then the rating following him declining it went down to tilt red. And then it went back to blue. And since that, it hasn't gone back to the GOP. I stand by this characterization. I think Maggie Hassan is on track to victory. The GOP just simply hasn't pulled together the right candidates. And I think while they still have a chance of victory this November, it definitely isn't the likeliest outcome. Moving over to the next state I want to characterize, we have the state of Arizona, where Mark Kelly has impressed me and Blake Masters has not. Blake Masters is the very extreme Make America Great Again Republican who is now positioning himself as an independent. But we don't forget the primary, and Arizona voters definitely don't forget the ads that Blake Masters ran time and time again. At the end of the day, Mark Brnovich was the more electable Republican, as as the attorney general who survived a blue wave year in 2018, who was able to win in the past, who proved his worth partially, but then simply fell flat on his face because he certified the 2020 election. Donald Trump's attacks, Blake Masters' attacks, Kari Lake's attacks, whatever it might be, contributed to Masters' victory, and now the Republicans will pay the price. Mark Kelly is on track to victory largely because Blake Masters is the less electable Republican. He's still an electable Republican. I would give him about a 1 in 3, potentially, a 2/5 chance in victory, 40%, but that's not the majority. That's not the likeliest outcome. And I think that Mark Kelly, knowing how strong a candidate he is, as the Democratic incumbent, does win re-election from the state of Arizona. Moving over to the next state I want to characterize, we have the state of Georgia. We're tying up the numbers here. Democrats are back at a 50-50 tie practically, with 2 remaining toss-up races in Nevada and Pennsylvania. Herschel Walker, similar to Blake Masters, doesn't seem to be the right candidate. Had Republicans nominated Doug Collins, or honestly speaking, just anybody else, Gary Black, for instance, the other person who was running within the race, who got about 13% of the vote as a statewide elected official. What we find here in the state of Georgia is that Republicans could have had anyone else. Herschel Walker might be a name that people have recognized, the celebrity status similar to Dr. Oz in Pennsylvania, but we see how that is backfiring on Republicans nationwide. Raphael Warnock is a tried and tested candidate from 2020 and 2021. Looks like he might complete it in 2022. And if Republicans lose this, the stakes are very high because Georgia is a swing state, but they won't be fighting for a Senate seat until at least 2026. And what's to say that's a good year for the Democratic Party? Then they're pushed to 2028. And what if they win that again? Where are they at? 2032. It gets difficult to see because the Republicans are going to have to bet on an environment better than this one. Honestly speaking, knowing the candidates and the candidate quality there and what they have put up in the past, or a better candidate than Herschel Walker in order to win in the future. Because if they aren't winning Georgia in a red wave year like 2022, they're not winning Georgia in any year better for the Democratic Party. And that's why this is so shocking. The Democrats are even in the advantage. Herschel Walker is likely going to lose to Raphael Warnock, and I think that has been well established for quite some time now. I do think that it is reboundable, absolutely. I would not be shocked if on election day that Herschel Walker does win, but as of today, if the elections were held today and Herschel Walker was to win, I would be quite surprised. I wouldn't be shocked. I would say, that's just simply how it is. A lean characterization is not absolute by any means, but it definitely gives us a better idea of where the race stands. And then in the final state I want to characterize before we get into what is actually going to determine the majority thus far is the state of Nevada. Now, Nevada, I have had some very big internal qualms about too. I think that Nevada is a state where historically Democrats have done well. Red wave, blue waves, sometimes, Democrats are able to hold on to some of their more contentious Senate seats, governorships, et cetera, et cetera. But this cycle, I think the Republicans, have the right candidate. I think Adam Laxalt, as the attorney general from the past, is the right candidate to win this race. Catherine Cortez Masto, quite frankly, isn't the most electable, or I would say just simply isn't Harry Reid. And I think the leadership within the Democratic Party in the state of Nevada shaking up over the past year definitely has made things a little bit more difficult to guess and see if the Reid machine is still implemented or if there's still going to be this backing amongst Hispanic voters for Democrats across the state. I think Nevada, of many states, is going to see some type of shift in favor of the GOP, but just so enough that the Republicans do end up winning this race very, very narrowly. I think this would have been the case for Arizona, Georgia, other states if the Republicans had the right candidates, but they don't. But in Nevada, they do. And that's how they're going to take advantage of this red wave year. And in the final state we are going to characterize, we have the state of Pennsylvania, a state between John Fetterman, the lieutenant governor, and Dr. Oz, the TV personality. And as of right now, I am confident that John Fetterman does defeat Dr. Oz. It isn't just the polling numbers that show Dr. Oz losing by 11 points. It's everything. It's the fundraising numbers. It's the way that the TV ads are being spent. It's the way that the candidates on the flip race, the governor's race, are impacting the Senate race. Doug Mastriano is a poison to the GOP and a poison, quite frankly, to this Republican agenda nationwide, because he is bogging down the one race with a Republican incumbent, Senator Pat Toomey. You will recognize his name because he's talked about all the time by the GOP, who is in this current Senate seat. There's another Democrat here, Bob Casey. So if John Fetterman wins it, Pennsylvania, a swing state, will be represented by 2 Democrats, joining the likes of Georgia, Arizona, Colorado, Virginia. But Pennsylvania is a state that Biden only won by 1. So to see a Democrat ahead in a state that Biden only won by 1 is very impressive. And it shows that John Fetterman is able to do what many of the Democrats thought was impossible and was pick up a seat in the U.S. Senate. Unfortunately for the Democratic Party, it is counteracted by a loss in the state of Nevada, but it does keep them within the majority. It's 50-50. And Democrats should be very happy about that because it means that they don't lose Senate control. This Senate midterms were the easiest on record for the GOP to win control of the U.S. Senate. In 2014, in the last red wave, Republicans picked up 9 seats, and today they struggled to win just 1. What is happening? I don't entirely know. But the Democratic Party definitely lucked out with many of these candidates, and the GOP just simply didn't field their best. They did in 2014, they did in 2010. That Tea Party movement was strong enough to win 63 seats from the largest House majority we saw in the 21st century to date, and flipped control of the House. But the Senate map that is so easy takes one individual seat when the majority of these swing states come from Democrats, and it isn't happening, tells you a lot about the state of the parties, the state of the nation, and what will happen in the future for both parties ahead of the next upcoming presidential election. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2022 Senate election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.